Our next speaker is Samantha Goldstein. Give me 1 second. Okay. Samantha is presenting on preliminary findings from a pilot study examining intimate partner violence, traumatic brain injury in women military significant others. Samantha is a doctoral student in the Health, Education, and Behavior Department at the University of Florida. Her research is focused on the intersection of intimate partner violence and traumatic brain injuries in women survivors. She's particularly interested in identifying pathways for comprehensive interventions that address long-term health consequences and multimorbid conditions to reduce health disparities. With that, welcome, Samantha.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Let me go ahead and share my presentation here first. So thank you so much for that introduction. I'm, of course, happy and honored to be here. I've attended all of these, so it's awesome to be on the other end and share some of my work. So without further ado, let's get into what we found here. I just want to share a brief background since we've already had the background of what IPV and traumatic brain injury looks like. I just want to give the context of the military significant other population. So they are typically an underserved, understudied, and difficult to reach population, particularly because it's not, unless it's through traditional official avenues like the Department of Defense or the Veterans Health Association. Or the Veterans Administration as well. And so this means that they are usually seen in the context of their serving spouse or which is active duty or their veteran spouse or significant other. And it's usually dyad work, not so much focused more on them as the individual, they're the dependent. Even within this environment, the institutional focus often prioritizes military sexual trauma and violence prevention over IPV. Those additional barriers in this environment could be really enhanced stigma surrounding mental health, fragmented care systems, limited recognition of survivor needs. And I think the big one here is that as a spouse, you have frequent relocations, which can cause disrupted care continuity and just disrupted social support networks. IPV is under-researched, yet the literature does show that we have seen it's highly prevalent in military significant others. And to our knowledge, there are no known studies that explore IPV, head trauma, or brain injury in this group specifically, because they're typically lumped in with the general population. So just getting into our methods for this study specifically. This was a cross-sectional online survey delivered via the Qualtrics platform. And so data collection took place from June to July of this year, 2025. We had several safety protocols within this survey to protect our participants, which was a quick exit button. We did mask the full eligibility criteria. We didn't allow a back button in the full study survey. And we did have a lot of like neutral survey opening language and measures before it got to violence-related items. Participants received a $20 Amazon e-gift card for full study completion here. And some of the other domains we assessed here, aside from the obvious that we already talked about, were mental and cognitive health, quality of life, social support, help seeking, and their care access, and also barriers and facilitators of help seeking. I'm sure a lot of researchers here are familiar with this, but timeline from IRB submission to final IRB approval was about 6 months, with lots of things happening in between there. So on the right, we just have the final approved study recruitment flyer for this study, the Milso Beach study, which comes from those highlighted sort of items in each word. So military significant others, behavioral, emotional, and cognitive health experiences. Some of those eligibility criteria were just the standard age 18 plus. We did ask that they identified as a woman, that they were a current spouse or intimate partner of an active duty U.S. service member or a U.S. military veteran. We did specifically target military significant other private Facebook groups and relevant Reddit subthreads. And this was unique because I am a member of this population as a military spouse, so I had access to this population. Participants had to complete the eligibility screener, which we had, which was a brief survey. And then they would proceed to a contact form to receive a personal survey link from myself if they were deemed to be eligible after some quality checks. So our final mass eligibility criteria that I mentioned in the slide previously was either scoring a 7 or higher on the extended hurt, insulted, threatened, scream, which is the EHITS measure that Kate Iverson and her team have used before, And this was just to assess lifetime IPV. And then we did this for a couple of reasons. So this was safety, to not broadcast that this was about a study about IPV, just in case there were safety concerns. This was also for data integrity because we were concerned about bots and fraudulent participants since this was online survey recruitment. We do recognize that IPV is underreported. And so since this was a pilot and feasibility study, we had to limit our pool to those that we thought would be more likely to endorse these items. And then just given survivor autonomy, that not everyone identifies as a survivor of IPV, but they may still have experienced these things, and it's important to address that. So just briefly, these study aims. We looked at the feasibility of recruiting military significant others through this medium. We looked at the prevalence of IPV, which was lifetime or past 12-month in this sample. And of those who report any IPV, what was the prevalence of IPV head injury exposure in this sample? And then aim 3 was just quick and dirty, not dirty necessarily, but just very preliminary group differences since we're still cleaning the data of IPV only or IPV head trauma exposed women military significant others across these known correlates of IPV and TBI. So substance use, PTSD, chronic pain, mental health issues. All right, so some demographics here of our study sample. Our final analytic sample consisted of 125 milsos. A pretty homogeneous or kind of overall group here was cisgender white women, non-Hispanic, non-Latinx, straight. Overall, all of them almost were married. Mean age of 36. They had a financially stable household, educated with a bachelor's degree or higher, mostly working full time. Some almost 84% almost endorsed having one or more children in the household. Almost 30% identified with a disability. And for the service member partner, we collected some demographics there. So almost 80% were active duty, primarily coming from the Army and Navy branches here, and 60% were a non-commissioned officer, which is a senior enlisted member. So for feasibility, this is kind of just my overall insights. The way we assessed this was I had included built-in bot and attention check items. So some examples of that is just we had an image of 5 coins. You had to correctly indicate the biggest coin. And so that would be one item against you. The other one we had in here that was sort of unique was we asked for the correct recruitment modality and gave wrong answers in there. So it had to either be from Facebook or Reddit, of course, and I knew we couldn't control if someone sent that to them. And so we had these 3 options, and within Facebook and Reddit, they had to pick the correct group or subthread. Once they progressed, if they endorsed all of these things and they were able to get through because they had greater than 7 or greater on the e-hits, they were able to enter a code word that they created in that survey, and then they went to a link to a contact form where they gave the code word again, and it had to match. And then they gave us their email that only they had access to. And so there were some interesting code words that came through. Pineapple was surprisingly common. And just did not rely solely on the Qualtrics kind of like internal bot settings and fraud settings, because sometimes they'll say this isn't a real person, but everything indicates they are because it's based on behavior, click behavior, different kinds of like how long you last on a screen or something. So I had my manual review with the eligibility decision matrix, and that was basically how many bot attention check items did they miss? If it was one or more, what are the other kind of like settings that were maybe indicate frauds or bots or whatnot? And ultimately, we were only approved in one Facebook group to post the flyer, and it had about 30,000 members in this private Facebook group. So we kind of used incorrect Facebook group as an automatic auto ineligible, just because like we couldn't allow other Facebook groups to be endorsed and say that, well, it was a mistake. So this is time consuming, but it ultimately helped us feel more confident in our final sample being real participants. And then these are just some descriptives here. So we had 851 eligibility screeners started. Of those, we had 72% completed. And from that completed pool of participants, so who was finally through to the contact form where I could assess them, 237 were deemed eligible for the full study, so about 38% eligibility. And then of those in the eligible pool and were invited, we had a 55% response rate. And within those that started the survey, so that 55% that started, we had a 98% completion rate. And so we did include some acceptability items that range from strongly disagree to strongly agree of a Likert scale. And so just things like took the survey seriously, answered it honestly, trust they'll be kept private, felt comfortable answering these questions. And it was pretty strong acceptability across the board, ranging from 4.7 to 4.9 on those items. In terms of prevalence, lifetime prevalence was kind of a given. So it was almost like at 100%, of course, because it was an eligibility criteria. But for past year IPV, we did include another measure in the full survey. And here is where it got a little tricky because there are ways to sort of measure that in terms of frequency and severity, which would put it more on the lower end of that range of 4%. And then I also didn't feel entirely comfortable just reporting that because there's some people that had systematic missiness that was intentional where they didn't endorse, it didn't happen in the last 12 months or different things like that. And so we tried to look at presence and absence too, which is where you get that more closer to the 16%. So if they endorse one item happening in the last 12 months, we said like, I can't say that's excluded. In terms of IPV head trauma exposure events, we had 37.1% who endorsed greater than one of those brain injury screening questionnaire IPV module items of the injury mechanism. And of those who endorsed more than one, the mean was about 2.4 and the maximum there was 6. And then, of course, we also had 18.5% who endorsed that individual item of strangulation and choking. So for our preliminary group differences, just kind of quickly to go through here, I did mention that we looked at PTSD. We looked at disturbances in self-organization. So this is from the ITQ questionnaire, the combined. And that looks like what you might see in complex PTSD. And so that could be like emotion dysregulation, anxiety, depression, we have substance use, we have resilience, social support, and chronic pain. I think here we're seeing a symptom of there being underpowered, but we did detect two significant differences here. So that the IPV head trauma exposure group did have higher PTSD symptomatology and higher anxiety. And some are trending towards significance, but we just may have been underpowered to quite get there. So some key takeaways. High completion and eligibility was within the expected range, which we would think with lifetime IPV in women about like nearing 40%. We had 38%. High acceptability in this group, which is great. Rigorous screening protocols hopefully ensured data integrity here. For AIM2, 37.1% reported more than one IPV head trauma exposure event on that BISC IPV module. We saw elevated PTSD and anxiety in that group, and there were trends toward increased disturbances in self-organization, depression, and chronic pain, while we didn't see any significant differences in substance use, resilience, or social support. I think future directions here, of course, is that we continue cleaning the data so we can kind of get a more detailed analysis on the BISC IPV module about defining traumatic brain injury in this population. Definitely refine recruitment strategies for next time to represent a broader and more diverse MILSO sample. Explore relationships across our demographic and experiential characteristics with our help-seeking constructs that we included, which are theoretically based, and conduct some qualitative interviews with the subsample participants from the study to better understand their survey experiences. Just some acknowledgements. My advisor, thank you so much to my advisor in our lab, my family, the military significant others, of course, who participated and made this study possible. Everyone here today is as well because you continue to inspire me to do this work. And then, of course, my NIDA T32 Fellowship Training Center, the UF Substance Abuse Training Center in Public Health, because they financially and just emotionally supported me through this. So thank you all so much. I'm going to end on this kind of questions, want to chat further, just overall contact information slide here.
Thank you so much, Samantha. There was so much care put into this study to prioritize safety of participants and also to preserve the integrity of the data. I was wondering if there was anything that you learned during the creation of this study that was helpful in creating those bot check items.
I think it is just not to rely on the Qualtrics settings because I often saw that they would mark someone as high fraud or high bot, and it could just be a duplicate respondent given the way we orchestrated the recruitment, that they didn't realize they had taken the survey already because they hadn't heard back from me. And so then started it again, but then kind of stopped. So it doesn't mean they're a duplicate fraud. It just meant like they forgot. And so if you just relied on that, you might get rid of that data. Same with the bot checking. I think it's a little bit liberal in who it considers as a bot. And that might be problematic in a population that has cognitive difficulties because they may spend longer on certain screens or on certain items and need more clicks to get to something. And so I think relying on that alone is not the best. And there is a lot of good work out there for people that conduct survey research that have like best practices. So I think just using a lot of tools in your toolbox and just really rigorously checking it, even though it's exhausting and your eyes kind of cross, it's good to do.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I really appreciated this presentation. It was so interesting.
You.
We're going to have a quick break right now, and we'll return in 5 minutes with 2 survivor conversations. Okay, thank you, Samantha, again.